is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime. Welcome to the show, folks. Get ready for one explosive show tonight. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. Kick back in your comfy chair for the next 2 hours. We are going to bring you a riveting show, an explosive show. Globally today, folks, as I look across the world, many people look at the Middle East and say, wow, what a mess. I think the hot spot we should all examine and look at is what's happening in the Ukraine. Very quickly, that could escalate to a 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Very quickly, we could find ourselves in a nuclear standoff. Now, let's go back to the 60s, height of the Cold War. What if I was to tell you that on a certain 2 occasions in March 1967, at a nuclear missile site in Great Falls, Montana, 10 nuclear missiles became non-operational. Now, what's even more ominous in this story is reports of UFOs had been flooding in all day. Now, our guest tonight, Robert Salas, his book is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, How World Governments Have Conspired to Conceal Humanity's Biggest Secret. He was there. He was there deep below the ground in a secured Echo Flight Launch Control Center, just like you see on the old 60s nuclear Holocaust movies, folks. He was down there at the control center. Now he was just getting ready for his shift, and all this took place. Could you imagine having that responsibility at your fingertips and 10 nuclear missiles become non-operational? Wow. Stand by for an explosive show, folks. Robert Salas, I want to welcome you to Night Fright for the very first time, and most definitely not the last time. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Robert, is there a microphone near you that you could move closer to your face?
Well, how's that? Is that any better?
It is better, actually. Yeah, it's proximity.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. If you can get as close to the microphone on your laptop as possible. Or if you want, I can call you back and we can do it via phone if you're too uncomfortable.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, let's fire away. Okay, so there you were. You know, you just graduated. You've only been in the Air Force for 3 years. 1964, you graduated. Now, first of all, what possessed you to take on this role to go down inside a nuclear missile silo?
Well, yeah, I had other assignments, and actually I volunteered for Vietnam. When I went to the personnel office, they didn't have an assignment for me, so they kind of put me on hold. Then a week later, they called and said they had this opportunity to go into missiles and also earn my master's degree in engineering. So I thought that was a good deal, and so I went ahead and accepted. And even though about a week after that they had a assignment for me in Vietnam, but I'd already decided to go into missiles. Yeah, so in 1966, I finished my training and was assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And quickly got qualified on crew duty with Fred Mywalt. We were both lieutenants at the time. But I just want to correct one thing. We were an Oscar flight, not Echo flight.
Oh, my mistake. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I was mistaken with that too. As a matter of fact, when I first heard about the incident being publicly released, or it seemed to me, this was 1994. So I'm backtracking a little bit, but between 67 and 94, of course, I couldn't talk about this. We had signed a non-disclosure statement. But in 94, I picked up a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good, and just happened to turn to page 301 of that book. And there's a short paragraph talking about missiles going down during a UFO sighting. And I got pretty excited because they were describing my event very, very closely to what happened at my event. And so I thought that was where I was. I was at Echo Flight. But as it turned out, Echo Flight shutdown happened about 8 days before the Oscar flight, which is where I was.
What was the difference between the two? Was it geographical location?
Yeah, very simply, Echo Flight is about 30 miles or so northwest of Oscar Flight. Oscar is near the little town of Roy, Montana. That's about 100 miles east of Great Falls.
I see. Can you walk us through that day?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah,
So I presume you got up and it just started as a regular old day.
Regular day, we normally have a briefing, and they tell us what's going on in the field. Sometimes they've got maintenance programs going on where they're tinkering with the missiles, but rarely is there more than one missile that's brought down for maintenance. And again, each flight has 10 missiles. So on this day, we were at Oscar Flight. We relieved the crew, went through our procedures, and sometime in the evening, what we do down there is one of us has to be on full alert status or wide awake.
I'm thinking that's not a bad thing.
It's 24-hour duty, so
Right.
we had a little cot down there, and so one of us was taking a rest break.
So just hang on a second, Robert. When you go down, do you go down for longer than an 8-hour shift?
Yeah, like I said, it's 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, 24-hour shift. So sometime, and again, we don't have any windows down there.
Right, sure.
And we didn't have any video cameras either. So people have asked, did you have video up there? We didn't at that time. This was 1967. And so we're 60 or so feet underground. We go down by an elevator and then go through a special procedure to enter the actual launch control center where all the controls are. They had no controls upstairs. So they couldn't have, instituted some kind of a hoax. And at any rate, sometime in the evening hours, and the reason I know it's the evening because the guard calls down and he says that there's been some strange lights in the sky. They can see it in the dark sky. These are unusual lights. They're flying very fast. They make unusual turns and stop on a dime, reverse course, etc. I even said, "You mean like UFOs?" Because we had, like you mentioned, we had reports in the newspapers for the past week or so before that of people reporting UFOs or sightings. So he said, "Well, sir, we can't explain it. We just want to report it." So I said, "Okay," hung up. About a minute or so later, maybe 5 minutes, can't remember. He calls back, and this time he's screaming into the phone. He's frightened. clearly frightened. Said he had all the guards out. We had about 6 guards up there. Their weapons drawn, pointing at this glowing red object. He said it was a pulsating red-orange, oval-shaped light. Basically, it was a very bright light. He could barely make out some sort of structure within the light. It was oval-shaped, but he couldn't get any more specific than that. And he was scared to death, wanted me to tell him what to do. And this thing was hovering right above the front gate. Yeah, just sitting there above the front gate. But it was massive. According to them, it was very large. So it could have been anywhere from 40, 50 feet, something like that. At any rate, this was a shocker. I didn't quite know what to think, except that it seemed like we were under some sort of a possible attack. In other words, something or someone was trying to gain entry. And so I just told him, don't let anything in the front gate. Use whatever force you need to, but don't let anything past the front gate. I later heard rumors, and this is from another source, another guard, only recently, actually, that one of the guards did fire his weapon at it to no avail. But then he said one of my guards just got injured, and so he hung up the phone. So about that time, I was pretty perplexed, didn't know what was going on up there. Happened to look over at my board just to make sure everything was in good shape, because we had a display panel that had the status of all the missiles, and they were all green. So I go over to awake my commander and start to tell him about the phone calls. And all of a sudden, we get all kinds of bells and whistles go off, claxons and horns. And we look over at the board, and all the missiles went down one by one, all 10 of them. And this was within a minute of my hanging up the phone to the guard. So the object was still up there when this happened. So we go through our procedures. We have a checklist. We queried the system. In other words, we had a method of trying to find out what was wrong with the missiles, because they were all in no-go status. They had all shut down. And basically the messages we were getting back were guidance and control system failure. So we reported it, asked for maintenance to come out and bring our missiles back up online. And that's when Fred Mywald, my commander, turned to me and said, the same thing happened at another flight. Now, I remember that so clearly, him turning to me and saying that. And I thought he meant the same thing had happened that evening. So when I wrote my first book, which is Fated Giant, I reported in there that the Echo and Oscar flight went down the same night. But as it turns out, at about that time, I found out that at the time I wrote my book, I finally got it published, self-published. I was in contact with another witness who said, well, when I talked to Fred Mywald, actually, and cleared it all up, he meant to say the same thing happened a week earlier at another flight. And that's when Echo went down. So we finally established the dates of the Echo flight shutdown and the Oscar flight shutdown. Echo went down March 16th, 1967, under similar circumstances, very similar. And I can tell you about that in a minute. But
Sure.
The Oscar flight went down March 24th, 1967. And we verified that date in a couple of ways, but mainly through the maintenance people that went out there verified that the date that all of Oscar flights missiles went down, and the date was March 24th, because there was another well-documented UFO incident around Great Falls, Montana, on the same day, and he remembers that.
Let me ask you this: did your comms go down at all?
No. Well, let me just clarify that. We had a couple of security lights go off at the sites. We had proximity warning system so that if something got into the where the launch facilities are, the missile where the missiles are actually located are called launch facilities, and if somebody tried to enter those facilities, then we got these warning lights in the capsule. And so we had two of these missile sites had warning lights, so we sent guards out there to check it out. This was after the UFO left, had shut down all our missiles. But we sent guards out there to check on the launch facilities that had these incursion lights. And when they got out there, they saw UFOs again. They reported this back to the flight security controller, the main guard upstairs. And on the way back, they did lose, when they approached the site, UFOs were there, they did lose radio contact. So it did affect their radios. These were VHF, UHF radios. So, yeah, we did have that problem. But we didn't lose comm in the capsule itself because we had telephone comm with the main base.
Were you able to contact the Central Command and let them be apprised of what was happening? Because we have to remember, folks, this is 1967. This is the height of the Cold War. An attack could come, a surprise attack could come at any time. This is what these fellows were trained for, is counterattack. And I mean, my God, when you've got a proximity alert going off, you've got comms going down in the field, and on top of that, you, for no reason whatsoever, your whole system shuts down. What did Central Command say when you contacted them?
Well, by Central Command, we had command posts back at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which again we reported to command post, and we also had a squadron command post, so we reported to both those areas. And like I said, the only feedback I heard was the same thing happened before. I do know that when I investigated the Echo flight incident, which I can tell you about in a minute, SAC headquarters got involved. In other words, they sent a team from Strategic Air Command headquarters out to Malmstrom Air Force Base and interviewed the two principals in that, the commander and deputy. And so, and one of the key pieces of documentation we have is a telegram from SAC headquarters to quite a few agencies, including Chief of Staff of the Air Force, that this was a grave, a quote from it, grave concern, because they could not explain the shutdown. This is not supposed to happen.
What was SAC's report? Was there a conclusion?
Well, that's a good question. The Air Force did a classified or a secret study of what occurred, and that study continued. And again, this is from sources within the military. Continued at least through 1972. This happened in 67, so at least for 5 years, they was trying to figure out what happened at Echo and Oscar. There was also a civilian team headed by Boeing that did an investigation, and they looked at anything you can think of, whether it was power surge or computer failures, things like that, even psychological things having to do with the crews. They did a very thorough job And I have correspondence from the team leader from that Boeing team. This was a Boeing team that said they could not find any pertinent or relevant cause for this to occur. What would have to, let me just give you the basics of what would have had to happen. This object or something would have had to send a signal, a specific signal, through 60 feet of earth and concrete, and then penetrate triply shielded from EMI or electromagnetic interference cables, triply shielded cables, which went to each individual missile, 10 separate missiles. And this signal would have had to upset the what's called the logic coupler of the guidance and control system on each missile separately. So that's what needed to happen for what did happen. So this is, of course, the main reason that I consider these objects of extraterrestrial origin, because I was very familiar with all the equipment we had in the Air Force at the time, and we had nothing that could even remotely could do anything like that.
I was going to ask you if there was anything to your knowledge in existence at the time that could do that, but you just answered that. The next question I had for you was the president notified? Would he be notified in a situation like this?
Hard to say. Well, we can go into this a little bit more later, but what was happening at the time was that there was the Condon investigation was ongoing, and the Congress had already ordered the Air Force to do a so-called scientific investigation of the UFO phenomenon and report back to the Congress. Now, whether word of this got back to the president, I don't know. I do know it got back to SAC headquarters and chief of SAC, which then I think, if I'm not mistaken, was, gosh, what was his name? General LeMay, Curtis LeMay.
LeMay was still there? I thought he had retired in 65.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. I know he was at my graduation. He gave the graduation talk at the Air Force Academy in 1964, but he may have retired before 67. So at any rate, SAC headquarters did know about it. So whether or not they sent it off to the president, I don't know.
Okay, folks, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm riveted to this seat. I mean, to find out about this all these years later, I lived through the 60s. And, duck and cover. That was the drill in those days, and there was no way that was going to protect you. But this was the kind of intense threat that we were up against all through the 60s. And in October 1962, let's not forget that there was a nuclear standoff.
Hello?
Hello, are you still there, my friend?
Are you still there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Okay, I thought I lost you.
Nope. Nuclear standoff in 1962 over the Cuban Missile Crisis. And fans of this show will know that I interviewed Ted Sorensen, who was JFK's speechwriter, and he's the guy that JFK tasked to write that letter to get Khrushchev to back down. And Ted walks us right through the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we were. And how close were we? Well, Jackie had called the president, Ted told me, to bring the two kids home because they all wanted to die together the next day. That's how close we were. Now imagine if the Ukraine ramps up today, folks, and Mrs. Obama calls the president to bring the two girls home because they all want to die together. That's how close we were. We're talking about another incident here that I had no idea about, one that took place in 1967. There was two of them. And one took place March 16th, 1967. That was called Echo. The other one, March 24th, 1967, that was called Oscar, and that's one we're looking at today with a first-person witness, a fellow who was there deep below the ground. His book identified the UFO phenomenon, and honest to God, folks, we're going to get there, but I'm on the edge of my seat because the Cold War is something that has fascinated me all my life and how we survived it. How world governments have conspired to conceal humanity's biggest secret. And of course, as always, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order it from the comfort of your own home. And tonight's a great night to settle in. Lots of time left if you're still joining us. Okay, can we talk about Echo and the similarities between what they went through and what you experienced with Oscar?
Certainly. Echo flight, um, uh, Walter Fiegel was on duty. He was the deputy commander, and Eric Carlson was the commander. Walt was on duty. When one of his missiles went down, he happened to have crews out in the sites that had stayed overnight because they were going to work on two of the missiles the next morning. This was early in the morning, and so Fiegel, when the missile goes down, Fiegel calls out to the site and says, "You're supposed to contact me before shutting down the missile, so that I'll know you're starting your work." And the fellow out there says, "Well, we haven't done anything. We just woke up, and by the way, there's a UFO above us." And same thing at the other site. And as he said that, all 10 of his missiles shut down, all 10. So boom, boom, boom. Within seconds, all those missiles shut down. And again, same query, guidance and control system failure. Now, just to give you a little bit more about that, the guidance system is an inertial guidance system. It had to be targeted. In other words, the system, each missile had to be targeted separately.
My latest book about the time when this was 1969. I was actually at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is another funny, not funny, but that's another part of this story. I was directed to go back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to finish my master's degree, even though I could have finished it at Malmstrom. But anyway, in '69, I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and ran into an old Air Force Academy buddy of mine, and he said they had a job for me, but I said I was there just to get my degree. I wasn't there for another assignment, and so he said, "Well, we'll talk to you later." And then a little after that, I was ordered to report to the base psychiatrist's office, and I had not complained about any mental problems. So I didn't know what that was about, but I showed up, very strange little area where the base psychiatrist was. The airman, after I waited for a little while, told me to come back and see the base psychiatrist. And I said, "No, I don't know why I should be doing that. Why don't you have the psychiatrist come out and tell me what this is all about?" So I refused to go back into his office. He comes back about 5 minutes later, this airman, and says, "Well, you can go now, sir." What I think could have happened is that they may have brought up the UFO incident and got me to make statements about that, and then they would have had something to hold over me.
To incriminate you, so to speak.
To incriminate me, so to speak, and ruin my career and use that as leverage. Anyway, that's the only time I think they tried to pressure me, I think, in some way. But I've never been threatened by this, and I think partly because when I finally did come forward and talk about this, I had quite a bit of evidence to back me up, because I had gone through the FOIA system and retrieved documents, and once I told people that I knew that the Echo flight had been declassified, that incident be declassified, they started talking to me. So I got witnesses supporting what I've told you, that came forward, even though they shouldn't have. Ordinarily, they wouldn't have talked, but they came forward because this Echo flight had been declassified. So that there was a series of events that were in my favor, and so the Air Force never made an issue of the fact that technically, even to this day, I'm in violation of the non-disclosure statement that I signed, because we've never received any official documents about Oscar flight being shut down.
Was there ever any official Air Force or SAC or any official report that said this was the direct reason for what happened?
There is a statement in one of the documents we have is a...
Wait, don't tell me they said it was a weather balloon. Just kidding, just kidding.
All right. There was a statement in one of the reports that we received under FOIA. It was a unit history report. And there's just one little sentence there that says, the rumors of UFOs have been disproven. Rumors of UFOs over Echo flight have been disproven. Rumors of UFOs over Echo flight during the shutdowns have been disproven. Now, how do you disprove a rumor?
Precisely.
They don't go into any detail about that, how they disproved that, because they certainly did not interview or officially in writing say they interviewed the crews or that sort of thing, because there were plenty of witnesses that saw these UFOs over the sites during the shutdown.
I still can't get over it. There was a lot of bases up here during the Cold War on the Dew Line, and we used to launch aircraft all the time to chase the UFOs that used to fly over radar bases and stuff, thinking that they could be Russian bombers, and they would just take off and go in an opposite direction, and there was no way you could keep up with them. And yet, a lot of these fellas are only talking about what took place in the 60s and the 50s now, because I guess they figure, what are they going to do to them all these years later? But I also know, because of the proximity I am to the Canadian Forces bases here, and what some of the pilots have seen, and they just won't talk about it on record. But they'll, they see me, they recognize me from the show, and they'll come and say, hey, you know what? But I can't tell you. I can't tell you my name because, they're still active. So this is a big problem, the ostracization.
It is a big problem. It's the ridicule factor. Basically, people want to keep their jobs. They don't want to be laughed at by, their fellow employees or anybody else, and keep their reputation. And no, they don't want to talk about this. Nobody really. Most people don't like to talk about this.
No kidding. No kidding. Folks, we're coming up to break in a few minutes, but I just want to tell you who we're speaking with. Robert Salas. Don't go anywhere. We have well over an hour left when we come back. The book is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, How World Governments, and we're going right there right after the break. Cabal, people. How world governments have conspired to conceal humanity's biggest secret of all. And the book is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon. Another book, Faded Giant, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. That will take you to a place where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Get that coffee going, get that tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. I hope you're kicking back in your most comfy chair. Relax. This is your time. And Robert's taking us on an incredible true story. How often, if ever, have you had the opportunity to speak with somebody who was actually deep below the surface in a missile silo? Robert, there's the music. We'll be back in 6 minutes. Can you hang on?
Sure, I'll be back in 6 minutes, okay?
See you soon. Take care, my friend. Welcome back, folks. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Welcome back to Night Fright. If you're just joining us, we have a full hour left with an amazing guest. Robert Salas is joining us tonight. His book is called Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, How World Governments Have Conspired to Conceal Humanity's Biggest Secret. He also has another book out called Faded Giant, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover and order the book from the comfort of your own armchair tonight. We've been talking about Robert's first-person witness experience going back to March 24th, 1967, when he was deep below the surface inside a control center controlling 10 nuclear missiles, just like you see on the 60s, the old 60s nuclear holocaust movies. And he was down there, he was in charge, and he was second in command, and 10 nuclear missiles went offline, non-operational. Just prior to them going non-operational, a series of phone calls had originated topside below, where there was unidentified lights hovering overhead. They had pulled out all their arms to defend themselves. This is the guards up topside, and they had contacted Robert down below. And we're talking about all the similarities between another event that took place just prior to that called Echo, and that was on March 16th, 1967 as well. Just a couple of more questions for Robert, and welcome back, Robert. Thanks for sticking with us.
You bet.
Where are they? Geez whiz. Now, how long were you able to sustain yourself underground in the event of a nuclear attack?
We had emergency rations down there and things like that. We probably could have lasted about a couple of weeks, maybe. We're lucky.
You think that would?
We would have had to dig our way out.
So it was pretty much a suicide, I guess. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think where the air would come from too. Now, was there a secure place for your family to go?
No.
No way.
No, I mean, how would you find a secure place in a nuclear war?
I don't think there is one. You know, that's what Sorensen told me. I had mentioned before, folks, that Ted Sorensen, JFK's speechwriter, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was the one that wrote the letter to Khrushchev. JFK tasked him with that, and he virtually saved the world with it. He had said there was no nuclear-proof bunker below the White House in those days, and that's why Jackie had called to bring the kids home so they could all die together because of missiles. And Khrushchev was fearing that Castro, because Castro was pushing for a first strike against the United States. He wanted to launch the missiles, and Khrushchev backed down. Thank God he didn't go with Castro. We thought Castro had lost his mind. But that's what Castro was pushing for, was a first strike against the United States. So that scenario was very, very real, that everybody was going to die and a nuclear holocaust would be started, because once the missiles are launched, then according to MAD, mutual assured destruction, the missiles will be launched in retaliation. So that's the end of the world. It's the end of the species for quite a few years. Quite a few. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Brett, I'm glad you're making this point because one of my main motivators at this point in my life is to emphasize the fact that we have to try to abolish all nuclear weapons.
Yes, sir.
As you know, or you may know, the situation with Russia right now in Ukraine is worse. And Mr. Putin is all but said that, you know, we have nuclear weapons. I think he pointed that out to the press the other day that remember, we still have nuclear weapons, and they certainly do. There's still 9 nations, nuclear nations in the world, and many of which are unstable governments or governments that are more than willing to use force. So we still have a very serious situation with regard to nukes.
Well, we know Pakistan has them. Do you think Iran
Right.
has developed them?
I don't know. I don't think they've developed a bomb per se, but they certainly know how to enrich uranium and probably could get above the 20% level, which is what it would take to make bomb-grade material very quickly. And so I think if they had to, or if they wanted to, they could probably get weapons-grade material fairly quickly.
That's frightening. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Israel has said
And
they'll
we know,
go in. If
yeah,
that's
Israel
the
has
case.
already said that, you know, that if these talks break down, very likely Israel may just decide to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, and then who knows what will happen after that.
What a bloody mess. But you're absolutely right. Where I'm very, very concerned is Putin's attitude.
Right.
And I'm hoping it's more posturing than anything else, because let's not forget, too, folks, Kennedy was dealing with Khrushchev, and just several years before Khrushchev and Kennedy were in that standoff, the nuclear standoff, Khrushchev had taken his shoe off at the United Nations and slammed it against the podium saying, "We will bury you. We will bury you."
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't such a stable character either, with nuclear weapons under his belt. So we've got to be
Right.
very, very prudent how we're dealing with this. What's your opinion of Mr. Obama's resolution so far?
Frankly, I think he's approaching it in the right way. In other words, he stated that they're still evaluating the situation, and they want to get partners in taking action. So they're talking about what action to take against Russia right now, and also what action to take against the Islamic terrorists. So I applaud him for not just jumping in and say, "Hey, let's go fight this guy," and use military force. We've got to be careful on how we deal with especially a man like Putin, and confront him militarily. And we've got to do it as in an alliance with other nations.
And that's the same thing Sorensen. I'll go back to Sorensen again. He said this is how Kennedy resolved it too. He built an alliance. And when you're dealing with another society, this is very important as to opposed to dealing with Osama bin Laden or another terrorist group that doesn't really care if they live or die. But when you're dealing with a society like Russia that's industrialized, they do care about public opinion. They do care what other nations are saying, and they do care when we put sanctions on them. That is a solid way of dealing with the situation, because once you draw that line in the sand and it's crossed, if you back down after that, then it's just going to be one country after another, the same way that Hitler did, the domino effect. So
Right.
I agree with you completely on this one. Okay, let's go back to your book. Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
The cabal. Now, would this be an area? See, I'm looking for ways that Russia, the same way that the Kennedy administration tried to do, they tried to look for ways to work with Russia. Would this be an area, UFOs, that Russia and the West could work on together?
Yes, I think they have been working on it together. Let's back up a little bit. You probably know the story of Wilbert Smith,
Yes, sir.
1950,
Canadian. Yeah.
Canadian, and he claimed that very definitely there was an organization, a secret group, he called it, led by I can't think of his name now. Slipped my mind. But led by a U.S. scientist who had actually run the scientific program for the United States during World War II.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I can't think of his name now either. Yeah.
Anyway, so and they actually wanted Canada to work with this secret group. So that right there is the clear indication that they were trying to get other countries, because obviously the UFOs were not just isolated to the United States; they're being seen all over the world. And so who better to work with this secret group in the United States but groups from other nations that were associated with the intelligence community. So, and I have it on another source from, I visited many foreign countries in speaking. I've spoken about this for about 20 years now. And I can tell you that I've talked to other military people who have been in meetings that where with U.S. intelligence people that have told them in no uncertain terms that their report to all the significant UFO sightings to them. So I do think that the United States is in the lead, but I certainly don't have any specifics on that. But in the lead in this cabal, which I call a UFO cabal, probably integrating and communicating with other intelligence agencies in other countries, and probably within Russia also.
Now, the ETs, I'll call them ETs, the phenomenon.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that malevolent? Are they out
Are
to
they
attack
malevolent?
us? Yeah, malevolent. Are they bad guys? Where's my coffee?
Well, that's a subject for debate, of course. In my case, or in the other, again, I list quite a few cases where UFOs were involved in the missile area and over nuclear weapon sites, over nuclear plants, energy plants, where they simply flew over, maybe shone a beam of light on the nuclear weapons and then flew off. And I think that activity is simply to shine a light on our nuclear program and try to encourage us to get rid of our nuclear weapons, which I'm absolutely for. So to me, that's more of benevolent, if you could think of it that way, than wanting us to survive, our civilization to survive. Again, they did not damage our nuclear weapons. As far as I know, they have not attacked us in any way, although there are probably instances, let's say during the 1952 flap over Washington, D.C., where some pilots claimed that they were attacked, and of course there have been cases where pilots in pursuit of these UFOs may have gone down under strange circumstances. So, but again, so this is a subject for debate as to whether or not they're malevolent or not. Now, associated with this phenomenon, and part of this phenomenon is the abduction phenomenon.
Precisely.
Which I also talk about in my book. And so we could look at that and say, well, they're kidnapping humans, they're doing experiments on humans, and nobody wants that. And so, however, if you look at it from their perspective, they may be doing something that they think might be helpful to us in some way. So, again, this is an argument that goes back and forth. I still have this argument with my wife as to whether or not these guys are malevolent or benevolent.
That's fair enough. Have you spoken with folks who have been abducted?
Well, you're speaking to one right now.
Please tell us this.
Yeah, this is also in my book.
Right.
And the reason I came forward with this is because I could no longer avoid the reality of it, and I also wanted to make sure that this part of the phenomenon is considered because it is very much a part of the phenomenon. I'll tell you my story very briefly, as much as I know about it.
Yes, sir.
In 1985, I was, and this is before I went public on the other UFO incident. 1985, I was living in Manhattan Beach, California, over here, and with my wife, 2 small children, in a particular house that I remember. Excuse me. And sometime in the evening, I wake up to see a bluish-colored light seemingly coming from our living room. I don't know what woke me up, but anyway, I see there's a light, a strange light in our living room, and I turn to my wife and I say, there's a light out there. I'm going to get up and investigate. And so, as I start to get up, I'm paralyzed. I can't move, and I turn to my wife and yell for help. I'm struggling, and this is one reason, one of 3 that I'll mention, that convinces me that this was a real event and not just a dream. Because I recall struggling with every ounce of energy I had, because I had 2 small kids in the house. Mm-hmm. And my wife. And so I turned to my wife, and lo and behold, she's unconscious. So the next thing I remember is looking at the bedroom doorway, and seeing a silhouette of a figure in the doorway. Seemed to have a hood on. I couldn't make out the face. Or at this point, I don't have a memory of seeing the face. Next thing I recall is rising off my bed. Now, some of this is going to sound very strange, but this is what happened. I rise off my bed, and I'm floating towards the bedroom window. Now, as I'm floating towards the bedroom window, it seems obvious they're going to take me out the window, and I recall thinking, they don't know how to open that window. I had latched the window, and so after thinking about it later, I realized that I thought they were small or childlike creatures, because, and again, I don't remember seeing what they looked like, but I do remember thinking that they were childlike and would not know how to open the latch of the window, or would have the strength to do it. But as I approached the window, they didn't open the window. Are you still there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
We just lost
power. We just lost power again. But the phone's working fine. So as I approached the window, I remember going right through the window. They didn't open the window.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I went right through the closed window. After that, I recall being on a table, in probably what was the craft. I don't remember going up into the craft. I don't remember, seeing a light outside the window, outside of our house. What I recall next was being on a table and being shown a long needle. It was a good 12 inches long, but the entity that was showing me this needle was holding it right in front of my eyes, so I could be sure I saw it. And somehow I was told that this needle was going to be inserted into my groin area, and so they proceeded to do that. They told me it wasn't going to hurt, but it hurt like hell initially, and until I complained, and that was the second reason I'm convinced this was not a dream. As soon as I complained about the pain, and the pain was excruciating, so that's the second reason. I recall the intensity of that pain, and so as soon as I complained about it, the pain went away. So almost immediately, the pain was gone. They finished whatever they were doing with me, and two of the beings escorted me over to kind of a bench. I sat there for a while, and then I was checked over by another being who came around behind me, and I remember him poking fingers along my spine. At that point, I was escorted by the two beings through a tunnel out to a bright light, and then back into my bed. The next morning, I didn't recall a thing. I didn't remember any of it. And I didn't even talk to my wife, didn't mention it. I didn't talk to her about it. It was not until approximately, I'd say 7 or 8 years ago, after speaking with other abductees, and some of these, what I've just told you, started to filter back into my mind, and of course I went back and forth as to whether this was just a bad dream or not, and until one day I was talking to my wife. Again, this is about 7 years ago, and I just happened to say, "Do you remember one night in Manhattan Beach where I saw a blue light in the living room?" And she said, "Yes, I saw the blue light too."
Oh my God.
So this, and by the way, my wife and I have been married for 45 years, so I know her very well. I know she wouldn't lie about this. Anyway, so that was the third reason that finally convinced me. And so I started going to hypnotherapy sessions. I've had about 4 of them so far, and that's where I've accumulated this information that I just told you.
That's explosive, folks. Our guest tonight, Robert Salas. Aren't you glad you stayed with us? Unidentified, the UFO phenomenon, how world governments have conspired to conceal humanity's biggest secret. www.nightfrightshow.com. Order this book. I've got a couple of questions for you. Was there any sense of smell when you were on the craft?
Any sense of smell? Not that I recall, no.
Okay, it's just, sometimes when you go to a sanitized room, there's kind of a sense of smell.
Yeah.
Color, was it all bright white or?
It seemed metallic or white. Yes, white. Excuse me. One of the beings seemed to have a kind of a white uniform or a white smock.
When they poked you down the spine, they touched you down the spine, they did so with their fingertips. Were their fingers cold, hot?
Rather prickly, pointy. as I recall.
Interesting.
I don't remember any particular temperature.
Right. Jeez. So that pain sensor of the needle going in, it must be terrifying for you to go through these sessions over and over and over again.
Yeah, it makes me somewhat anxious because I know that there's much more of the experience which I have not recovered. The memory of it has not been recovered yet. So, at this point I felt I've got enough information, and not sure I haven't decided whether or not to go forward with more therapy sessions or hypnotherapy sessions.
What would you say? There's lots of people listening right now that are still cowering in the shadows. They're afraid to come out and admit not only to other people but to themselves that they have been abducted. What would you say to them?
Well, it does change your worldview. So I think it's an individual decision. I think they have to really ponder how much more information they'd like to retrieve. But there are groups, like in California here, we've got a group called CERO, which is run by Yvonne Smith. You may have heard of her. She's, at any rate, they've got support groups for abductees, and I'm sure you can find them on the East Coast there and other places. Yeah, I would contact one of them maybe and go to one of their meetings. So
group therapy is definitely
right.
Yeah.
But, John Mack, the Harvard professor who had studied the abduction phenomenon, had estimated that there's probably millions of individuals worldwide that have been taken in this way. So another aspect of this phenomenon is that they've obviously got some objective here. Why are they taking so many of us and doing things, experimentation?
Precisely. You must be clairvoyant, because that was one of my next questions for you.
Right.
What's the motive?
What's the motive? And there is strong indication that they are producing hybrid children. Hybrid, part human, part ET. And for what purpose? Who knows?
Do you feel that they're amongst us right now, these hybrid children?
It's very likely they could be, because they have been doing this for some time. And so possibly they're producing these hybrid children and sending them back to Earth for whatever purpose. So again, this is part of the mystery of the phenomenon. I don't want to get into speculation too much.
Fair enough.
But there seems to be enough evidence from people who talked about their experiences of being shown these hybrids and told that they were theirs, that they should hold them, give them love, things like that. So I think that is happening, but to what end is speculative.
To circle back to the international cabal that knows about this.
Right.
Are they giving them permission, or are they just, I'm going back to the X-Files now, are they really working with them, or are they being used by the extraterrestrials?
Yeah, good question. Again, that's an area of speculation. If you're asking my opinion, and I think I've expressed this in my book, that there is some sort of communication going on with the cabal. There has been some sort of interaction. Obviously, not obviously, but I the indications are that some beings have been retrieved during crash retrievals, still alive, and so no doubt there has been some back and forth communication. Maybe those beings lived for some time, and
Is there
again,
any chance, I was just going to, sorry to interrupt you, is there any chance that because we have acquired alien bodies, is there any chance that we could be the ones that are producing the hybrids?
Are you talking for military purposes?
Perhaps. Let's put it out there. Sure. You know, I was going to
Well,
get into
I've
your
heard
drone
I've-
experience too, so, you know, this was a lead
I've
into
heard,
that.
yeah, I've heard those rumors. These are called military abductions, I guess, MILABs. But again, this is, to me, it's speculation. I have no evidence to support it. But again, I've evolved to the point in this phenomenon where I don't discount much of anything, because phenomenon and different aspects of the phenomenon are so strange. You can't just out of hand, I don't out of hand discount any possibility.
Do you think they're close by, or perhaps they're using a portal to travel here? Maybe they're interdimensional?
Again, that's an area of speculation. Certainly, it would make sense, from our rationalization to build bases that you might be implying on the moon, for example, or build bases on Mars and use those as ways to travel to the Earth, make it a little easier on them. But again, that's speculation. I just don't know.
So there's something there without question. You know, we've seen the drastic increase in drones. First, I'd like to get your opinion of drones. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And also some of your personal experiences with drones, the ones you can talk about. You know, I certainly don't want to put any of our forces at risk.
Oh,
yeah.
So I may have mentioned in my book that I did fly drones. This was 1965 when I was an air controller. Anyway, I flew a radio controlled drone as a target drone.
I see.
And for fighter interceptor target practice, basically. So that's my only experience with flying drones. But what do I think of them?
Yes, sir.
Of course, they are. This is high tech. There's a question as to how accurate they are, of course, and how whether ethically. Ethically, they ought to be used, and the power ought to be vested in government. So, and our president, for example, to take these drones basically anywhere and take somebody out. So there are ethical questions involved. I don't know. Do you have a specific question about it?
No, that's fine. That's, I flip both ways on it.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
because, on one hand, I don't want to see any of my friends or family members put in harm's way. Yet on the other hand, I have the same ethical questions that you do. Is this morally responsible? Do we have the right just to use drones? Do we have the right to use robots to do our killing for us?
Exactly. And this leads into the extreme secrecy, which again I talk about in my book. There's a lot of activities that our government's involved in that we are not able to input the public should be able to know, how these decisions are made when we use these drones. By what authority does our president have to take out people anywhere in the world? These are questions that the public should be engaged in, but these are parts of the extreme secrecy within government. So that's one of the major issues we still have. The governments are extremely secret, and the public just has no access, no way to get that information.
The president doesn't have the highest secret clearance either, the toppest secret clearance.
Mm-hmm.
And that concerns me as well. Going back to the CIA and all some of the dirty things that they've done over the years. I was just saying last week in a show that it seems that the CIA views the presidency as a short-term period. In other words, 4 or 8 years, but they're going to be around for a career, 20, 30, maybe 40 years. And they're not going to tell the president everything that they're doing for fear of shutting it down and shutting their own careers down.
Exactly.
It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening.
Exactly. So what we've got then is we've got a secret government that people don't know about. I mean, because if they're not informing the president about everything that's going on, then there is a secret group within their government that is in the know. And these are the career types, career intelligence people, for example, that know where all the bodies are buried, and they're not about to talk. Yeah.
You mentioned General LeMay before. He wanted to go in for strike during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He thought that was the best way to, he felt that it was survivable, that if they hit Russia first and Cuba first, America could survive a nuclear war, that they could take out enough missiles in order to survive. And JFK was terrified, and so was Sorensen, as they sat around the table. They just couldn't believe this was coming from the leader of SAC. It was
absolutely.
Yeah, it was suicidal thought.
Well, in fact, just about every president up to, I don't include President Obama in this, but just about every other president has had either his advisors suggest the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons during a conflict, or even presidents have considered it. And I think I've got that itemized in my book when those things happened.
When you were writing your... Please go ahead.
I said that is frightening, that the military advisors, for example, during Vietnam, suggested to Lyndon Johnson that they use nuclear weapons, both against China and against the North Vietnamese. And
Nixon was pushing for that as well.
Right.
Yeah, the same thing. He wanted to end the war. And actually Eisenhower, I think it was Operation, what the hell was the name of it? Vulcan? Was that right? Started with a V. I can't remember, in the 50s. He wanted to use nuclear weapons too. Because, folks, you have to realize that these guys were staunch, brave soldiers getting us through the Second World War. And they were still, what's the old adage that they always say? You always fight the next war with the last war's tactics. And that always gets you in a mess until you catch up. And this is exactly what they were trying to do, fight the Cold War based on what they had learned in the Second World War. And it was virtually a new frontier, no pun intended on the Kennedy administration, because one nuclear weapon it's extinction. It's virtually extinction.
Right. Well, people like General LeMay, you mentioned LeMay, of course, he was responsible for the firebombing Japan.
That's right.
And also the bombing in Germany.
Dresden?
Dresden, yeah, where they just wanted to completely destroy everything. And that's how they thought they would demoralize the enemy. So I had no doubt that LeMay probably suggested that nuclear weapons could be used and we'd come out ahead somehow.
You know, you've got this wonderful perspective, and I love it. You're a very balanced guy, and you have a great perspective on geopolitical events that are happening right now. How do we balance the real threats? How do we assess the real threats, the real bad guys, against those that are perhaps manufactured to make us, put us in fear? And I'll give you a good example. ISIS, I think they're a real threat. How do we balance that against something that might be manufactured just to keep us in fear?
Yeah, no question, ISIS is a real threat. They've taken a lot of territory in Iraq, and so we do have to confront them, and we have to confront them militarily. And I think the same thing with Russia. I hate to say it, but we're going to have to confront Russia militarily. Now, that doesn't mean we send troops over there to Ukraine, but what it does mean is get an alliance together, like a NATO alliance of sorts, and show force. And it's just like you would do with any other bully, a school bully. In order to, you have to confront bullies and show force in order to get them to back down.
Put them in a corner and give them a timeout.
Yeah, whatever. But Putin has proved himself to be nothing more than a thug.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. But there must be people that, I go back to the missile crisis all the time because I spent an afternoon with Ted Sorensen in his apartment, and he said, there's always somebody, some type of moderate that's in the background that you can talk to and you can utilize and leverage that. And I was wondering, and build common things that you can build towards together, like the dismantling of the nuclear arms race. Also, the space thing that we finally got together that is, unfortunately, NASA has canceled now with Russia. Do you think a common enemy like ISIS, we know of the Chechnyan Muslims as well, the extremists there, do you think that could be a common enemy that could unite East and West as it did during World War II?
Yes, I do. I think the West has to unite against the extremist elements in the world, because ISIS shows the fact that ISIS exists shows that these extremist groups will coalesce. They'll come together. And the last thing we want is an Islamic State bent on destroying the West, because they will acquire nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
There's no question about it.
Well, and they'll just take over Pakistan.
We can't allow that. We just can't allow that. Yeah. So we've got to confront them. We've got to do it united and go after those guys. So again, I'm not a pro-war guy necessarily, but in this case, I think we need to confront those guys militarily.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I really do. Yeah, we got to take the raison d'etre away and schools, without question. We got to educate folks and bring them into the 21st century and get them out of the 8th century and the 7th century. Folks, we're speaking with a great guy tonight. Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon is the name of his book. Robert Salas is our guest. You've got to get his books because he's a heavy thinker, folks. Faded Giant is another book he's written. And easy way to get both his books, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. As always, that'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. What's the global climate now? Are you concerned for the future? I don't know if you have kids, if you have grandkids. Are you concerned for their future?
Absolutely.
Does this make you afraid? Because I'll ask you this right out. In many abduction cases, it follows through the family. Are you afraid for your child, your children? Are you afraid also for your grandchildren? They may be abducted?
Yes.
Mm.
I don't have any grandchildren yet, but I do have children. Like I said, the incident that happened in Manhattan Beach, I had small children in the house.
Yeah.
Whether or not they had been taken, that we really haven't gotten into that, but it is highly possible that they were taken. Many children have been taken. Some claim to have been taken to some sort of school or the craft where they were taught in paranormal things like telekinesis,
Right.
things like that. So yeah, they are taking children, no question. Some of these experiences talk about being taken from childhood into adulthood. Now, so the question of fear, I don't like to dwell on fear. It's really a question of trying to figure out what's going on, what the objectives are, and
Yes.
what can we do about it.
Precisely.
That's another reason for disclosure, public disclosure, so that we can all decide what we need to do about this.
Well, you certainly moved towards that. September 27th, 2007, at the National Press Club, you organized a terrific press conference. Can you walk us through that a bit for the folks that are unaware of that event?
Oh, the one in 2010. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I said 2007. Two things I need to do more often, folks, and that is drink more coffee during the show so I can pronounce names and put my damn glasses on instead of at the top of my head. I apologize.
Well, I've been I've been at the National Press Club many times. And again in 2007 and in 2010, Robert Hastings and I organized a press conference where we invited other military officers and who had experiences in the field with UFOs, and we got them to write affidavits, signed affidavits, stamped and signed by notary public, their statements, which to a man say that they encountered UFOs in the field at military bases, and so those gentlemen spoke publicly about that. We did get pretty good press coverage. And by the way, your listeners can go to YouTube and hear those testimonies of those officers. So, and then again, you know about the citizens' hearing on disclosure in 2013. I went and testified again with three other ex-officers and airmen who had experiences, actually recruited them to come to Washington, D.C. and talk about this publicly in front of a panel of ex-congressmen, U.S. congressmen.
Were they receptive in general, Robert?
Absolutely. They were skeptical at first, but by the end of the conference, they were absolutely convinced that this was a reality and that ought to be disclosure.
Did any one of those folks come forward with their own experiences?
Are you talking about the ex-congressman?
Yeah.
No, I didn't hear that. No, I did
Okay,
not.
I was just curious, because sometimes that happens, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But these are efforts, again, that I wish the public would focus on. The fact that, like I said, we have a lot of ex-military people that have come forward now, and they've signed affidavits. In other words, they're telling the truth, and yet the mainstream press doesn't seem to get it.
No kidding.
Doesn't
Listen,
get
I told you
doesn't
about the
go
Ted Sorensen thing. Sorensen confirmed conspiracy, not a coup d'etat, but conspiracy. I've tried every mainstream outlet in the world, and I've got nobody to pay. And that's from Ted Sorensen. This isn't from, some guy way down the line. This is the guy that wrote the letter to Khrushchev to get him to back down. And I can't get anybody to touch it for fear that I guess they'll be considered a loopy kind of person or something. I don't know. So I understand exactly what's going on, for sure.
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen? Do you think a congressional investigation into your event? I don't think they're going to touch Roswell at this point, but I'm thinking something
Mm-hmm.
that challenges national security as your event did. I think
Right.
that deserves a congressional investigation, don't you?
Yeah. I'll tell you, after there was a conference in 2001, right?
Right.
The original disclosure conference that Stephen Greer organized. At that time, after we spoke, and we got a great press coverage of that, after we spoke, we actually walked through the halls of Congress, and literally stopped congressmen in the hallways and asked if we could speak to them about the UFO issue. We did get a few of those congressmen to actually sit down and listen to what we had to say. And we had at least one or two promise that they would follow up on this. Well, that was 2001. It was in the spring of 2001. And, of course, on September 11th, we had the September 11th incident. And so all bets were off on UFOs.
Yep.
So our next objective here is to get back into those offices and see if we can get them to listen to us. And
Yeah, I think the timing could be right on that.
We'll make that effort again.
Yeah, by the way, folks, we're coming up to the anniversary of 9/11, and I just want to tell you, in the archives, I had interviewed Colonel Robert Darling, who was in the White House bunker that day, taking orders from Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice. Give it a listen. It's well worth it. It's historical. Just as our guest tonight has been first-person witness to an incredible event that took place March 24th, 1967, when he was second in command down below, 60 feet below the surface in nuclear-proof, what we'd hope a nuclear-proof little bunker himself, and 10 nuclear weapons he was in charge of releasing went non-operational. And what is ominous, as I said in the beginning of the show, reports of UFOs had been flooding in. And folks, I would just want to thank you all for listening. Our guest tonight has been Robert Salas. Thank you, Robert. Very kind of you to come on.
You bet, Brent.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely enjoyed it. Kelly Logue, as always, thank you, my friend, for helping out with the website. This show could not operate without him. I'm Brent Holland.